Alright, welcome to lesson 6.5, factor with lead coefficient a equal 1 and a greater than 1. Well, since this is point 5 of lesson 6, we're going to go to the a is greater than 1. And this is really not too much more complicated than what we did with a equals 1. It just involves more steps. So let's jump on in. So let's say we have ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, b, and c are integers. So they can be any positive or negative number. So when our a is greater than 1, we still have these three things that we follow. We still have p plus q has to equal b, p times q has to still equal c, and our a times c, the absolute value of that, is our process to find our p and q. What's different is this. This is a setup that we have after we find p and q. Instead of just going right to a to parentheses problem, we set this up. So this doesn't make a whole lot of sense right now, but it'll make a lot more sense whenever we move to the actual example that I'm going to do. So I'm going to go ahead and let's go there now. So here we have 2x squared minus 6x minus 8 equals 0. What we should do is still write down what our a is, what our b is, and what our c is. It's just a good habit to get into. Now we're going to multiply our a times c, and we get positive 16. So we're still going to look at the factors of 16. So 1 and 16, 2 and 8, 4 and 4. And we still need to get a p and a q that is going to add up to this negative 6 and multiply to give us negative 8. So 1 and 16, well, there's no way we can get 1 and 16 to add up, so it's out. 2 and 8, alright, that looks like a good candidate. Well, we know we need to get negative 6, so that means our bigger number should be negative. So is 2 minus 8 negative 6? Yes. 2 times negative 8 is negative 16. So we know what our p and our q are. But instead of putting it in parentheses like this, what we are going to do is we're going to write it out in this format. We're going to take our ax squared, so our 2x squared, and then we're going to just plug in whatever our p and q is. So our first one is a plus 2x, then we have a minus 8x minus 8, and it's still equal to 0. So we create this. And what we're going to do now is we're going to factor some more. We're going to factor this. And in order to do that, what you do is you separate these first two terms and these last two terms. So we're just going to separate them with an imaginary dotted line. What we're going to do now is we're going to factor out everything in common from each side. So I look at 2x squared plus 2x. I first look at the numbers, then I look at the variables. So what number can I divide 2 by and 2 by? Well, 2. So I can factor out a 2 from both. Alright, now I look at the variables. Here's x squared and here's x. Well, they both have at least one x, so I can take out an x. I can't factor anything else out, so I put a parentheses. So what you do now is you look at each term and you look and see what you took out. So out of the first one we took out a 2 and an x. So because we took out a 2 and an x, the only thing we have left is an x. we took a 2 and an x out of the second term, well, we can't just have nothing, so it's a plus 1. Let's keep our dotted line for separation. Our second side, we have a negative 8x and a negative 8. We look at the numbers, they both have a negative 8, so we factor out negative 8. This has an x, but there's no x here, so we can't factor out an x. So when we're done factoring, we put our parentheses. We factored out negative 8 out of negative 8x, and we're just left with x. We factored a negative 8 out of negative 8, and we're just left with 1. Now you should notice something here. You see that right here, this x plus 1 is the same thing as this. And that is what we want. We want both our parentheses to have the same thing. If they do not have the same expression inside the parentheses, then we know that we did something wrong with either picking our p's and q's or with our factoring. So that's a good check for us before we move on. Now the next step after this is we still need to keep our equals 0 here, sorry. Our next step is to make our two parentheses. Our first parenthesis is going to be this common parenthesis, whatever they have in common. So they have an x plus 1. Your second parenthesis is what is left over. So there's a 2x left over, and there's a minus 8 left over. Equals 0. And there you have it. There's our factored form. And then we would solve to figure out what x equals. But you guys know how to do that, so I'm not going to elaborate and go into that. So let's go ahead and talk about some examples for you to try. So I want you to use that process that we just did to figure out the factored form of this and then solve it. So go ahead, pause the video, and work with your group now. Alright, and here is the worked out solution to that example. I want you to notice, though, right here, that sometimes you're not going to be able to factor out a number from this expression. Sometimes you can only factor out a variable, so make note of that. It doesn't always work. Let's go ahead, pause the video, and check this with your group. And after you do that, there's another example. Alright, here is a second example I want you to try with your group, so go ahead and work through this now. And before I go any further, I just wanted to tell you that I made a mistake. This, and you probably noticed it sooner than I did, this p times q equals c, well, for this it's not always true, is it? So it's not always going to be true that p times q equals c. And we saw that here because our c was negative 8 and we got 2 and negative 8. So I apologize for that. So please go ahead and make that note in your notes. And I'm sure you already caught me on that already. So please make a note of that, and I will continue to finish this. Alright, so apart from that blip where I made a mistake, and apologies again, here is the solution to that example. So go ahead, pause the video again, and look over this with your group. And then after you do that, there's one final example for you to try. So go ahead and do that now. Alright, and here is the solution to this example. So go ahead, pause the video again, and go over this with your group. After you do that, this video is over.